to doubt the liberal project, to disagree with their agenda, can only be ascribed to an acute moral failing. Conservatives are either morally or intellectually deficient in the liberal view, and there can therefore be no really legitimate reason why anybody would dissent from what liberals are hoping to accomplish.
Welcome to The American Mind. William Voegeli is the senior editor of the Claremont Review of Books and a visiting scholar at the Henry Salvatori Center at Claremont McKenna College in Claremont, California. He is also the author of a new book, The Pity Party, a mean-spirited diatribe against liberal compassion. Bill, welcome to The American Mind.
Thank you, Charles.
Now, what would move a calm and generous soul like yours to write a book that is a mean-spirited diatribe against liberal compassion?
Nothing could make me do so. And in fact, I did not do so. I don't think the book is mean-spirited or a diatribe, but I think the subtitle calls...
This is false advertising, you mean?
Yes, indeed. People who are opening the book, hoping for the next and Coulter volume will be perhaps disappointed. But I think the subtitle calls attention to a fact of modern political discourse, which is that liberals treat it as a self-evident truth that to doubt the liberal project, to disagree with their agenda, can only be ascribed to an acute moral failing. Conservatives are either morally or intellectually deficient in the liberal view, and there can therefore be no really legitimate reason why anybody would dissent from what liberals are hoping to accomplish. The subtitle is an effort to say, hey, wait a minute, there's more to the argument than you guys think there is or admit there is.
Now, a couple of years ago, you wrote another very good book called Never Enough, America's Limitless Welfare State. That book was also about liberalism, or at least an aspect of liberalism, and it focused on liberalism's departure from the Constitution, on the progressive movement of 100 years ago. The new book is different in its diagnosis, at least insofar as you focus on pity and compassion rather than progress or the state or any of these sort of progressive concepts. Are you changing your analysis of what liberalism is and where it comes from?
I hope that I'm elaborating it. There isn't anything in Never Enough, a book that's now 4 years old, that I would change in a revised edition. But I think that Never Enough raised questions that it didn't answer. Specifically, it took note of, as you say, the fact that the liberal project is never ending. There will never be an iteration of the welfare state that has all the money, all the programs, all the personnel that it needs, so that liberals say, our work here is done. There's nothing more that we can improve on. And I argued in that book that following arguments I've learned from reading your work and that of R.J. Pistrito, that this goes back to what James Q. Wilson called the destruction of legitimacy barriers, the idea that government can do certain things and not others. The liberal project involves heavily a commitment to the notion that if it will make life better, the government ought to do it. End of story. What I wanted to do with the pity party was to, as students of Leo Strauss like to say, to try to understand liberalism as it understands itself, rather than rush ahead to understand it better than it understands itself. Understanding it as it understands itself means that it's not enough, it's not fully defensible to simply say, well, liberals are people who get up every morning saying, what can I do today to make the government bigger? So I think that perhaps they really do think this way. Perhaps there really is nothing that liberals like better than to raise taxes, increase regulations, make government more powerful. But we conservatives keep waiting for the smoking gun, the clear admission that this is what they're up to. And it doesn't sound like it's forthcoming. We've been waiting a long time. So I think trying to understand them as they understand themselves means understanding them as people who get up every day saying, there's suffering in the world, what can we do to lessen it? And so I think that even though the means they resort to do in fact involve a steady, limitless expansion of the welfare state, their endeavors as they understand them treat that as a collateral consequence rather than the main focus. The main focus is to make the world a kinder, gentler, nicer place with less suffering, a more compassionate place. So I think to understand liberalism on those grounds required an investigation of that question.
Well, your previous analysis emphasized, as a philosophical pedigree, Hegel, the German philosopher. I guess you could say your new book emphasizes Rousseau, goes back beyond Hegel. And whereas the progressive style of liberalism was highly rational and philosophical and bureaucratic, the politics of compassion or of pity, as you describe it, is highly emotional, highly emotive, and not so laden with theory and reason and so forth. So does that mean, does the move from one to the other mean that, in your view, liberalism has given up on reason, given up on the sort of philosophical, the elaborate philosophical grounds that they once at least championed? Have they, is this the best liberalism can do now, in a way, to switch to emotions, to pity, because they don't believe in reason anymore, they don't believe in the administrative state or the rational state, or all of those things that once preoccupied John Dewey and many others?
Yes. Yes is the shortest answer to that.
Well, I'm glad we got that out right.
It's odd for me to be explicating this point sitting across from you, since most of what I know about it I've learned from reading your stuff. But in the sense that liberalism sort of no longer believes in itself. There is the triumph of non-foundationalism is I think, quite thorough at this point. Liberals find it difficult to argue that their opinions are objectively better than anyone else's, and prefer to simply say, this is what decent people want. And that is much easier to do if you make your stand on the grounds of compassion than if you do on the grounds of reason expressing itself through the rolling out of history. These things seem sort of nebulous, and it's become more acute, certainly, for American liberalism, the American left, since the fall of the Berlin Wall. So you had one path that was quite explicit about finding through history the realization of reason's ultimate purposes. That's severely discredited, except in a few cultural studies departments around the country. You don't find Marxists anymore. People don't take that seriously. But the desire to alleviate suffering, to help, that remains. And so it seems sturdier, in a way, to erect your structure on those foundations than ones that liberals themselves no longer really take seriously.
And you would say you have a very interesting discussion later on in this book about environmentalism. Mm-hmm. That's one area where liberals still claim that science is on their side, and that science has made up its mind on the question of the human
Global
influence
warming,
on global warming and so forth. But do you think that they are serious about that science, or is even environmentalism an issue of compassion for other species, mm-hmm. if not for the human beings?
Well, I don't think in their minds it's an either-or question. They choose to think and often say that they live in the reality-based community. But they have on the one hand, a very ad hoc approach to what counts as reality-based. The evidence that is useful is that which they emphasize. Evidence that is less so, or that is ambiguous or uncertain, they're content to discount. And this is why abundant evidence that various of their projects don't really do the things they purport to do never seems to really faze anyone in that camp. When it comes to that sort of thing, it's a faith-based movement. Since we're trying to do the right thing, mm-hmm. eventually we will succeed, no matter how little evidence there is of this on the ground. But I think that, yes, this selective resort to science, reason, rationality, is used to reinforce a compassionate agenda. Who are we to cause the disappearance of other species, to the shrinking of the rainforest, mm-hmm. that sort of thing? And so, yes, and several of the more sort of exotic theoreticians, deep environmentalists, are quite explicit about this, mm-hmm. that being a decent person means having compassion for other species.